Today, we're undertaking, a deep dive into an immensely high-stakes topic, the latest documents released from the Jeffrey Epstein estate. Specifically, we're looking at a very recent, quite targeted disclosure by Democrats on the House Oversight Committee.
Yeah, and it's crucial to understand the scope right away because this is really about a tiny sliver of information being leveraged, it seems, for maximum effect. The committee, they've subpoenaed this just a mountain of material, 8,544 records, things like financial ledgers, flight logs, phone logs, daily schedules, spanning nearly a decade, 2010 to 2019.
Wow, okay. And out of that massive haul, over 8,000 documents, how much did they actually make public in this so-called third batch?
Just 6 pages. 6 pages of partial records. That's the striking imbalance we need to sort of keep in mind here.
Yeah.
6 pages out of 8,544.
6 pages.
But these specific 6 pages, they mention some very prominent names, from the highest levels of global commerce, tech, conservative politics, and even royalty. So our mission today is really to unpack the nuggets of information within this very specific tranche of records.
Okay, but before we even jump into those names, there's an immediate necessary caveat, isn't there? What's the official line on what these documents actually prove?
Right. That context is absolutely vital for you, the listener. The officials involved in the release, they've been pretty explicit about this. While these documents show contact, or at least planned contact, they contain no evidence that the individuals named were aware of Epstein's alleged criminal sexual abuse of minors.
No evidence of awareness. Okay.
Exactly. The stated goal of the release seems to be documenting the breadth and depth of his network, not necessarily proving criminal complicity, at least not from these specific pages for those mentioned.
Understood. So it's documentation of association, maybe proximity. Let's start with what feels like the more modern chapter of his network maintenance. I mean, the tech titans and the conservative political figures whose names pop up in his schedules, often significantly dating to the years after Epstein was already a registered sex offender, right, back in 2008.
Exactly. That's a key point. The fact that the network persisted and maybe even seemed to thrive well into the 2010s, that's perhaps the most significant sort of structural takeaway from this whole thing. So let's unpack maybe the most talked about entry, the one involving Elon Musk.
Right. The entry is dated December 6, 2014. It appears on one of Epstein's daily schedules. What exactly does it say?
The wording is almost, conversational, like a note to self, perhaps. It reads, reminder, Elon Musk to island December 6. Is this still happening?
Is this still happening?
Yeah.
And that island, that's got to be Little St. James Epstein's private island.
Almost certainly, yes. That's the clear reference, Little St. James.
Okay, that suggests a pretty serious level of planned engagement. But when this news first surfaced, Musk himself issued a really strong public denial about ever making that trip, didn't he?
He did, yes, very forcefully. Musk publicly stated that the claim of a planned trip to the island was false. He said he refused to go, even though he acknowledged being invited.
Okay, refused to go. But he did admit to meeting Epstein elsewhere.
Yes, he did admit that. He confirmed visiting Epstein once at his Manhattan home, said it was for about 30 minutes, an encounter he later kind of dismissed, mentioning what he called weird art.
Weird art. This raises an interesting question, though, about the nature of these documents themselves. These are Epstein's personal schedules. So how much weight can we really put on an entry like that? Could it just be, wishful thinking? Or maybe aspirational scheduling on Epstein's part, trying to big himself up?
That's a really great point, and it gets to the core of interpreting this stuff. These schedules, they document Epstein's intent, right? His intent to maintain contact, to build status, and that in itself is its own form of evidence. Whether the meeting actually happened is almost secondary to the fact that he was actively trying to integrate figures like Musk into his circle during this post-conviction period.
Right, it confirms who he was targeting for his network.
Exactly, the targets of his networking efforts.
Okay, so if that's the sort of fuzzy nature of a potential island trip, let's move to something that looks, much more conventional on the surface. A scheduled lunch with Peter Thiel, billionaire, venture capitalist, major Republican donor.
Yeah, that entry looks, let's say, far more solid. It just lists a planned noon lunch, Peter Thiel, November 27, 2017. So this meeting, documented much closer to the end of the decade, seems more like a typical kind of business or political networking lunch.
And the contacts seem to continue right up until almost the very end. We also see documentation suggesting engagement with Steve Bannon, former White House chief strategist, Trump ally.
Yes, and that entry is very late in the timeline. It's only months before Epstein's final arrest on those federal sex trafficking charges in July 2019. The schedule lists a planned 7:00 a.m. breakfast, Steve Bannon, February 16th, 2019. Which, it demonstrates that his influence, his network access, it wasn't just historical stuff, it was active, current, right up until the end.
And we shouldn't overlook the mention of Bill Gates, too, kind of tucked into the same period as that Elon Musk entry, right? December 2014.
Correct. The files also mention tentative plans for a breakfast party involving Bill Gates,
Yeah.
December 2014. And as you mentioned earlier, Gates himself has acknowledged meeting Epstein and publicly called that association a mistake.
A mistake, right.
So what's fascinating here is how these records, even just these few pages, consistently show Epstein focusing on these really influential high net worth figures. Tech, finance orbit, and crucially in the years after 2008.
Okay, so if those entries reveal the sort of modern maintenance of his network, let's shift the timeline dramatically now. Contrast that with records that take us way back to the earlier years of his known associations, the records involving Prince Andrew. What did this small batch reveal about him?
Right, so we have two types of records here that seem to pertain to the Duke of York, dating back to 2000. The first one is very direct. It's a flight manifest. It lists Prince Andrew as a passenger on Epstein's private jet, alongside Epstein himself and Ghislaine Maxwell.
Okay, a flight log. And the route, where were they going?
It shows Teterboro, New Jersey to West Palm Beach, Florida, May 12, 2000. So that's pretty definitive proof of, proximity and travel with Epstein and Maxwell early in that decade.
But the second set of records, those financial ledgers, they're more ambiguous, right? Less clear-cut.
Yes, exactly. This is where the interpretation gets a bit trickier. We see these heavily redacted financial ledger entries, February and May 2000. These ledgers, they detail payments for specific services, things like massage, exercise, yoga, but it's for an individual identified only as Andrew.
Just Andrew. It seems like quite a leap to definitively connect those specific expenses to Prince Andrew, even if the timing aligns with his known U.S. travel back then.
And that really raises the important question, doesn't it? We do know from palace records, public documentation, that Prince Andrew was in the U.S. around those dates. There was a New York trip, May 11th to 15th, 2000. But is there a smoking gun here? No. We cannot definitively say, based only on this ledger, that the Andrew getting payments for yoga is the prince.
So it's circumstantial. Suggestive, maybe?
I'd say circumstantial, suggestive evidence. It needs to be seen in the broader context of his, established travel and his association with Epstein during that exact period.
Okay, so these documents, they add maybe some specific date and location context to an already known, if still heavily disputed association, one dating back over 2 decades. Prince Andrew, of course, settled that civil lawsuit brought by Virginia Giuffre back in 2022, but he has consistently maintained his denial of any wrongdoing.
Precisely. And the royal connection here kind of acts as a chronological anchor. It shows that while the new focus of this release seems to be the tech world of the 2010s, Epstein's relationships with these global high-profile figures, they started much, much earlier.
Right. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Because the contents of the documents themselves, that's only half the story, isn't it? The other half is the political fight over the release itself. This whole process seems to have turned into a really partisan battle over who controls the information and when it gets out. We have to, impartially report on this political controversy around transparency.
Oh, absolutely. This is almost a textbook example of information control becoming a political weapon. This small release, these 6 pages, it was done unilaterally by the Democrats on the House Oversight Committee, and their public justification was very, very specific.
Right. The official stance, I think it was from Oversight spokesperson Sarah Guerrero, was that the documents prove Epstein was, quote, friends with some of the most powerful and wealthiest men in the world, and that releasing them is key to working to bring justice for the survivors and victims. The Democratic push seems to be using this partial release to pressure the Attorney General, right? Release all the files now.
That seems to be the core of their strategy, yes.
Yeah.
Generate enough public pressure using names like Musk and Thiel to compel the full unredacted release of the other, 8,500 plus documents? Framing this as a necessary step, transparency, accountability.
But the Republican side of the committee, they immediately launched a counteroffensive, didn't they? Accusing the Democrats of turning the whole investigation into a purely political exercise.
Absolutely, yeah. A very swift and strong reaction. They argued the Democrats were cherry-picking documents, selectively deciding which records to publicize. They even claimed Democrats were, quote, conveniently withholding documents that contain the names of Democratic officials.
Hmm. So basically dismissing the release names Musk, Thiel, Bannon as old news, things that had been rumored for years anyway.
Pretty much, calling it old news and promising that they would release the full set of documents soon themselves.
Okay, so we have these two completely competing narratives. One side saying this is about justice, transparency, the other saying no, this is partisan political targeting.
Hmm.
And this intense pressure is translated into actual legislative maneuvering too, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. This back and forth really highlights the intense legislative pressure surrounding these files. That's why we're seeing all this political drama. There's this ongoing push for a mechanism in the House called a discharge petition.
Okay, for those maybe less familiar with the ins and outs of Capitol Hill procedure, what does a discharge petition actually do?
Think of it basically as a way to bypass the leadership's control over what gets voted on. It needs 218 signatures from House members. If it gets them, it forces a vote on legislation, in this case, legislation that would compel the full release of all the Epstein files. It lets rank and file members kind of go around the committee structure, bring a bill straight to the floor.
And the sources we looked at indicated that after a recent special election win, they got that final necessary signature, that the petition was actually expected to succeed.
That's the significance, yeah. It signals that, despite all the partisan sniking about who's cherry-picking what, there's massive internal pressure. Across party lines, or at least a highly motivated bloc, pushing to force total transparency on this issue, at least in the House.
Okay, so if we step back for a second, try to connect this all to the bigger picture. What's the single most important takeaway for you, for the listener, from this specific small batch of documents?
I think it really boils down to two things: the timing and the political theater surrounding it. First, the documents confirmed that these high-profile contacts, especially in tech and finance, Musk, Thiel, Bannon, Gates, were potentially happening, or at least being scheduled, in the years after Epstein became a registered sex offender in 2008.
Right, that he maintained this functional, influential network deep into the last decade.
Exactly, that persistence. And then second, how that persistence, combined with the historical context, like the Prince Andrew details, feeds directly into the political battle. The release itself, these 6 pages, seems designed primarily to put pressure on getting the rest of the information out.
Yeah, makes sense. Every new document produced, no matter how small, provides new leverage, right? In this bigger quest to identify complicity, maybe achieve justice for the survivors.
Precisely. The 6 pages, they didn't offer some huge, shocking revelation maybe, but they offered specific, usable facts, names, dates, things that fuel that legislative push for full transparency.
Absolutely. So, the focus today was just on 6 pages. 6 pages out of the 8,544 documents that were subpoenaed. And if these few pages can spark this much controversy, this much partisan maneuvering, one side alleging obstruction, the other alleging cherry-picking, it really makes you wonder, what is the true significance of the other 8,538 pages, the ones that remain, for the most part, unseen? You really have to consider the implications of this ongoing fight over what information gets revealed and when. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Thank you. Yeah, the fight over who gets to tell the story, sometimes that's even more revealing than the story itself, isn't it? Always more to learn.